Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. We are ready to start. I'll Stuart Shils, whom you probably know very well. Stuart is a dear friend, an astounding painter, artist, and inspiring art educator. Okay. Well, at least my proof to what I've just said is my experience of seeing Stuart for the first time about 17 years ago when I was a student at the Maryland Institute. And Stuart was a visiting artist and a visiting critic.
It was more years than that, Ilya.
2002 or 2001. Yeah, more than that, almost 20.
Wow.
I think it was 2002. So, and there were some things that, well, I was desperately struggling my way through painting. I was trying to figure out what the hell I was doing. And there were some things that you said in response to my work that have stayed with me ever since, and they give me food for thought continuously. So that's, so you do have a way to inform and inspire, that's for sure. Today, we will not talk about Stuart's work so much. We will discuss the experience of looking at art in general and how that relates to the experience of looking at the visual reality around us. So before I start with my questions, Stuart, would you like to say anything as an introduction, and then we'll go on to the questions?
Right. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would just say that before we talk about looking at art, we really have to talk about looking, about seeing, because art is only part of the story. There's like we don't just put on our thinking caps when we go into the studio or when we go into the museum. We're looking we're watching ourselves watching all the time. From the minute we wake up, and even when we're asleep, we're still watching ourselves watching, because we're having dreams, and the dreams are visual and cinematic. So we're always engaged with this process of absorbing and recognizing and trying to make sense of the visual world, before we even get to art.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But in so there is art, there is everything around us, and then there is us looking at things. And you're saying that we have to analyze how we actually experience by looking.
Well, that's part of the right. That's part of the game. I feel that when we say do something like go to art school or study in some way, that the goal or the expectation is not to learn anything related to technique, because technique is just one person's story. Most of the things that are being taught as technique really are either irrelevant, or they're not rooted in any historical experience necessarily. What's much more important for us is to be closer tuned to our own awareness of watching ourselves watching. I mean, that's what education is about. Visual education is because most of us, before we came to visual awareness, had no clue. We were following the pathways of words, of ideas, of literary thoughts, of narrative stories rooted in words and sentences. And as visual people, my feeling is, at least I'll speak for myself, that's of no interest to me. My primary focus, or what I like, is watching myself watching. And I can remember at the beginning of my visual education being astonished at what was coming into focus. how the world was like coming into focus through this lens that had never been used. Because I was sitting around thinking, I have to get a hamburger, I have to walk the dog, I have to change the tire, I have to go visit Rotem. That like all the things that are in our mind are not visual. And that as the visual world came into focus, it was like one step after another, like entering an atmosphere that I had no clue existed. And it's probably the same. I mean, I'm sure that if someone, begins to focus on sound, on music, even if they're playing the piano after school, how can they not, when sitting in a room with people talking, start listening to the nature of notes and intervals and the spaces between notes that actually are like notes, so like as a parallel in the world of sound, the watching ourselves watching, for me, is like half the game. Because if we're just responding by conditioning to something that we're taught, that's not really us.
In our preliminary conversations, as we were preparing for this talk, you mentioned more than once that to you, looking at a dilapidated building, let's say, or some unappetizing aspect of reality, like a poor neighborhood in your town, can be as visually exciting as going to a wonderful museum. And I can understand that perfectly well as a painter. What I'm wondering about is whether there is a difference to you, whether to you looking at art in a museum is different from looking at visually stimulating reality, let's say in Philadelphia.
Yeah. Ilya, can you bring up the pair that has the Hockney, the David Hockney landscape?
Yes, it will take me a second, but I'm on it.
So I've asked Ilya to bring up a photograph of a pair, and one of them is a David Hockney landscape painting, and the other one is a photograph of a place that sits just across the street from my studio. It's a field that I like to sit in when I'm taking a break. Ilya, do you have access to this? And then also after that,
I'm taking care of that.
What's that?
I'm taking care of that. Just keep talking.
Great. So here we go. So what's the difference? What is a difference between these two images? The painting by David Hockney is a construction of his own thoughts that have been organized into a particular structure. Whether or not it's something that he looked at or to some degree was invented, it doesn't really matter, because all painting is invention anyway. Even when we're sitting and looking at something, it's all invention, because we have to go through the process of deciding, of tasting. When we look out to something, we have to put it into some kind of order. Not an order in terms of pre-established order, but we have to make sense of what it is we're looking at. So we can't put everything in. Now, the image of all the stuff sitting in the backyard is different in the sense that I've just taken the camera and framed this view, and the camera's a machine. It's not a human mind. The camera isn't concerned with hierarchy. The camera doesn't know what's important and what isn't important. Looking at a photograph is a flat experience. If we could go and sit down there and look at this place, it would make its appeal to us in a very different way. because when we're actually sitting and looking at something as opposed to looking at a photograph, and of course I love photographs, I look at them every day, but it's not the same. When we look at something in actual real life, what we're seeing is alive, that the entire place is full of a palpable kind of presence. And one of the first things we understand when we actually sit and look at something, and it doesn't matter what it is that we have to make some choices, because it's only through the camera, and it doesn't matter if you're using a camera that costs $60 or an iPhone or a $5,000 Leica, a lens is a lens. And look, lenses are beautiful things, but they have no discrimination. Looking at a photograph is like being in bed with a corpse. There's nothing happening. It's dead. This photograph is just an accumulation of stuff. Now, of course, I was holding my phone, so I framed it in a particular way, and I've looked at this place many, many times, and this is just a fragment of a much larger picture that I've isolated, that, you know, it extends in every direction. The photograph is not the complete reality. So I've already made some decisions about framing this image. But when I look at the red wheelbarrow that's back there, and I look at the orange-red cones in the front, and I look at the truck, and I look at the table, everything is the same. There's really no differentiation except by some sizes and shapes and colors. And we're seeing, as the photograph presents everything to us in a kind of equivalent way in terms of how do these objects appeal to us. But if I actually sat down there and looked, and if I looked at the red wheelbarrow, if I looked at it, everything else would go into a different kind of focus. That's the way the eye works. That's not how the camera works, except in the hands of someone who is able to control the camera in a very subjective way. And that usually means also in some post-production, because post-production is as important to the photographer or to anyone using a camera, because you can't just take what the camera offers at face value. But if I were sitting there, if I looked at the two cones in the front, I wouldn't see the red wheelbarrow, or I wouldn't see the truck in the same focus that the photograph is presenting them to us, because that's not how the eye works. So the painting by Hockney is a very different story. Any painting, because it's already a digested experience. You know, the photograph is just, the camera is just presenting us with a kind of a dispassionate image. The painting has gone through a process of selectivity and a kind of a refinement of choices. And also, even though they may not be evident to the average person walking through a museum or a gallery, that every part of the painting is the result of a long list of concerns and choices. You know, like a lot of thought has been poured into the shaping of every aspect of the painting. And that would include many things.
So if I manage to distill correctly what you're saying, to you, looking at reality is full of potential and full of many types of potential, while looking at a painting is an actualized potential. So in other words, in reality, there are many choices, there are many ways in which you can look at the same view, and in painting, these choices were made for you, at least in part.
Yes, but one of the things that I've always found with painting, with good painting, whatever that means, and maybe this is part of what good painting means, or maybe this is related to what good painting means, is that there are some paintings I can go back and look at them over and over and over again, and they continue to open up. In the same way that when I was an outdoor painter, I used to go back to the same places over and over and over again, and they opened up. I've looked at this painting many times, and every time I look at it, I notice new things.
Mm-hmm.
It's the flavor, the aroma of the painting is so complex that it takes time to move through the reality that it's presenting. That it's more than just if let's just say this place actually existed as is, and I don't know if it does or not,
mm-hmm.
because I don't know anything about his working method back then. But let's just say this place existed and we took a photograph of this place. I doubt that the photograph would be the same as the painting, in terms of what the painting is delivering. Like, for instance, I mean, first of all, just the design of the square. There are so many ways of entering this painting, or there's so many ways that a painting can call us in. And one of the reasons that we go, and remember, we're only looking at a reproduction here that's far removed from the original, but still it's conveyed in the reproduction. One of the reasons we go back to looking at the same things over and over again is because they continue to deliver in ways that are not possible at just one pass. I've looked at this painting so many times, and I've talked about this painting in classes so many times, but I've never, until now, I've never really thought about the tree that's furthest over to the left, the trunk, and then the shadow, and then the space between the shadow and the trunk of the tree. That long finger of light between the shadow and the trunk over on the left. I've never consciously noticed that before. Why? Because there's so much to see in an otherwise apparently simple painting without a lot of fuss. But there's actually an enormous amount of fuss in terms of the exquisite nature of decision-making that went into this painting. And that's basically what we do when we go out to, if we sit down, if we're painting observationally, we have to go through, it's not just a matter of what we see, it's a matter of what do we do with it. Because who knows? There may have been all kinds of other stuff there. There may have been pebbles or gravel on the ground. There may have been all kinds of stuff that for whatever reason, Hackney chose not to put in. No one puts in everything. It's impossible to put in everything. You get indigestion. But nature also requires that we come back over and over again to understand what's there, because it's not really possible to understand everything at the first pass. Ilya, does this address at all your question?
More or less. So if I understand correctly, you're saying that both nature and a sufficiently advanced and complex painting offer us more material, way more material than we can grasp immediately, or let's say in first encounter. I think I got that right.
Yes, but of course, in different ways, because the painting has already been distilled through the strainer, through the sieve of the human mind. Whereas nature, in this case, is just presenting itself through the relatively homogeneous distillation of the camera lens, in which
Yes, but let me stop you for a second. I'm not asking about photographic representations of nature. Let's say you are there next to that palm tree in front of this white building. Let's say this place exists, and you're not looking at a photograph of the place. You're looking at the place itself. How is your experience of how's your experience of looking at those trees and this wall may differ from looking at Hockney's pictorial interpretation?
Well, the first thing I have to do if I'm going to sit down and make a drawing or a painting of this, I have to figure out what it is to me in that moment. You know, what matters. What matters, and that may have to do with the quality of my attention. You know, how I'm paying attention. And that may be conditioned or informed by many things. It may be that that I had a certain kind of breakfast, you know, that influenced me in a certain way, or I had a bad dream at night, or I had a really great coffee with a friend in the morning, and it just set the day off in a marvelous way that has a very decided impact on state of mind. You know, when we're looking at something out there in nature, the first thing we have to do is understand, what does all this mean to us? Whereas when we're looking at a painting, when I'm looking at the painting, I'm understanding what it means to him. Now, of course, I understand something about how to look at nature by way of how I've learned to look at paintings. But those paintings have also been informed by looking at nature. So it's a very kind of mutually interactive, interdependent choreography in terms of our looking, that everything we're doing matters. When we're walking down the street, when we might not be paying attention, but we're often stopped by something we see because it's taken us by surprise. And this kind of thing is happening to us all the time. Then there are moments of more intentional looking, where we actually go out and sit down. I'm going to make a drawing or a painting. But even if I go out, if I'm going out to make a painting of something, the first thing I want to do is to open my drawing book and to make some drawings, because I have to root myself in the experience of being present. I never understood this business of where people just sit down and they start painting. What are we going to paint about? I can remember in the summers when I used to go to Italy to work, I would usually spend the first week just drawing all day long. Because what is this? I've come to a place I've never been before. I need to get to know the place. It's like meeting someone and going out for a coffee, then you go out for another coffee, then you go out for a dinner, you know, and you get to know each other. Like, I need to get to know the place. So Hockney has gotten to know this place in his own way, but that might not be the way that I'm going to look at it. You know, I have to root myself primarily in my own experience there, and you know, I want to turn the page and make another drawing and make another drawing, because in each drawing, I'm trying to imagine or understand, how can I look at this? In the process of drawing, the thing that I am not doing and the thing that I am not interested in is getting it right anatomically. You know, that I'm not making botanical drawings of trees. I'm not making the kinds of a drawing of a house that an architect or an engineer might need in order to build. I'm working myself through a graphic and emotional distillation of what it is that's important to me. And that is a process. It's not just something, it's not like putting on a CD, you know, and the song starts. It's something that we have to work for.
Stuart, before we proceed, do you want me to switch to another image, or are we staying with the same one?
Why don't we switch to the one in the same cluster with the Cycladic sculpture and the architecture with the green building.
Okay, I'm on it. It will take me a second. Do you see it now?
Not yet. I'm still
Okay.
seeing the other one.
Mm-hmm. Okay, 1 second. Here we go.
Okay. So this is a Cycladic sculpture from Athens, and it's very small. There are larger ones, but this one is small. And then there is this place that I passed on the street where they're building some new apartment buildings. And I wish they would just leave them like this, because what's going to be there is just some horrible stuff, probably faceless. And this is so interesting as is. So I'd like to point out, I'd like to just look at the Cycladic sculpture for a minute and talk about the kind of exquisite tuning of focus that was already present in human civilization a long time ago. You know, this is, what is this, Ilya? The earliest art that we have from Greece?
That must be about at least 1500 years before the Common Era, at least, maybe possibly 1800 years before the Common Era.
Much older. I mean, this is before the flowering of Greek culture as we know it from museums.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's seemingly very simple, but it really like offers or demonstrates or reveals to me what it is that artists are after. And that is, by way of form, to hold the viewer in a hypnotic grip. I mean, for me, maybe one way in my own subjectivity of asking what is the difference between good art and bad art. It has nothing to do with style. It has nothing to do with technique. It has nothing to do whether it's 20th century, whether it's 18th century, whether it's 14th century. It has to do with how long does it hold my eye? How long does it hold my attention? And, you know, with students, I often talk about the idea that when we look at a place, say we're working observationally, when we look at a place or when we look at a work of art, there are two things we want to consider. What has attracted me to this? You know, why am I looking at this in the first place? Why am I spending my time looking at this? What are the attractors? What is pulling us to stop and look? Just imagine you're standing in a museum and you're watching people walk along. What do people spend in a museum? 3 seconds in front of a painting? Why does someone stop for half a minute in front of a painting and look? Clearly, or sculpture, something has attracted them. So we can ask ourselves, what has attracted me? We can ask ourselves the same question about people we know. Then, more important to us is what's holding us and how long does the hold last, right? Because that's important. I mean, we're attracted by many things, because how can we not be attracted by things that are apparently dazzling, you know, appealing for one reason or another, but then it might be like, you know, keep moving. But there are things that hold us. And the holding is what's of interest to me analytically in trying to understand what is it about a work of art that holds us beyond, say, the first superficial flourish of its presentation. And now the interface between the questions about what holds us in nature and what holds us in art, this is where the two become, with the more looking we do, with the more paying attention we do, the more sort of sublimely interconnected these two things become. Because the first thing that we have to learn for ourselves when we sit down to look at something is how to construct the narrative that we want to tell about this place, right? I'm going out to paint. I sit down in front of this place. It's throwing itself at me. There are many, many elements there, right? There are all these different parts. Where am I looking, right? I have to become aware. And of course, looking at a photograph is a flat, dead experience. It's not the same palpability as if I were there. First of all, the camera tends to push everything back in space, so it makes it more removed. But when I'm there, I have to hoist the sail and see where the wind is blowing me to understand what kind of a story do I want to make about this place. It's not just a matter of constructing an inventory list of everything that I see, because the inventory list just leads to a list of stuff. I'm much more concerned with understanding how to construct a narrative response that is hierarchical, meaning that some things are going to be more important than others, and that some things are not going to be important at all. In order to offer, to construct an image that's going to be coherent for a viewer, other than just an object-oriented inventory list. So when I look at this figure on the right, it's an exquisite distillation of this kind of experience. There are not so many parts of this thing. There are not so many parts, yet whoever this artist was, they're making great use of the parts that are there. The first thing I notice is that the top is more or less a square, and the bottom is a rectangle, a vertical rectangle. So immediately I see these two shapes. Then the arm on the left is very subtly defined. There's no real anatomical definition in the arm. The arm comes down from the shoulder and then goes up at an angle, like that. The other arm comes down and goes straight. It's a 90-degree angle, more or less. It's a profound difference. The two hands are handled very differently. The articulation of the fingers, the articulation stands out so much in relation to the relative flatness of the chest, except for the two nipples. The triangulation of the crotch is a very simple form. Whoever this artist was understood what could be delivered with saying very little in a certain sense. But the way the story is constructed is an example of what we all really need to do, which is if we're making response to something that's observed, we have to decide what is it that's important to us. And everything cannot have equal importance when we're looking. Some things have to be primary, some things have to be secondary, and some things have to be tertiary in order to tell a story in which everything is not competitive with everything else.
Mm-hmm. Would you like me to switch to another image now?
Yeah, what should we talk about?
Okay. Well, basically, I prepared a number of questions, but in a certain way, you've answered a bunch of them in one long statement.
Let's talk about something then. How about the number one, the image that has the Francesca Woodman photograph?
Yes, I'll find that image in a second. Can you see it?
Not yet, Ilya.
Okay.
Okay, so You know, some of you who know me know these images and these kinds of images. One of the things that I enjoy doing is finding, is understanding, finding bridges between things that might be apparently unrelated. Because we have all kinds of names that, you know, from the beginning of our education, it's all about words, titles, labels, all that stuff. I prefer to think in terms of what the French poet reminded us of, that seeing is forgetting the name of the thing seen, Paul Valéry. Because as people involved in the visual world, at least I can speak for myself, I'm not interested in the names of things. They're an intrusion. They're an intrusion and are introducing a kind of analytical mind that I want nowhere near seeing or feeling. I'm not concerned with the names of things. They're irrelevant. The faster we forget the names of things and even what they are, the sooner they will invite us in for lunch, so to speak. So one of the things I've enjoyed doing on my computer, and I used to do it when we were still using slides, is to make pairs of things that don't appear to be the same, but are actually very closely related. And I think of this as accessing various Rolodexes, you know, Rolodex, you know, where we used to keep all the telephone numbers on a Rolodex. I don't think we have those anymore because we're using these now. But imagine that I have a library of all my experiences from walking around in the course of the day, and all my experiences of looking at art, and then all my experiences of actually working in my studio. And what I aspire to do is to open those libraries of images and to build bridges between them, with no concern for good or bad, right or wrong, no one's rules. You know, I was trained in a very conservative, somewhat fundamentalistic setting in which there were ideas about good and bad. You know, I mean, I didn't look at any art from the 20th century when I was a student because I came to believe that art of the 20th century is for the most part a waste of time. Of course, I don't believe that anymore, not for a very long time, but I don't want to deal with ideas or words or titles about things. What I'm trying to do is understand how things are related to each other. So often when I go for a coffee in the morning at the cafe in the neighborhood, for 10 years or 15 years actually, I've been making photographs of the cakes that sit in the glass case. I never eat these cakes, but I take photographs of them. So in a sense, I eat them with my eyes. I mean, we eat the world with our eyes, right? Like, we don't eat the world with our mouths, we eat the world with our eyes. I take pictures of the cakes with my phone and sometimes with a camera. And what I'm trying to do is understand how I'm seeing and what, you know, how I'm seeing, not what I'm seeing. I'm not concerned with the what, because what we learn as the visual world opens itself up to us, and as we begin to see the power that is just laying on the sidewalk in every direction, you know, so to speak, metaphorically, one of the things that I'm most concerned with in a visual way is learning how to recognize opportunity. How to recognize opportunity. And you know, so when I was younger, I can remember when I was a student, I used to go out painting with friends. And we would often spend half the morning driving around looking for the right spot. What were we looking for? I can remember this. Let's just talk about in the countryside, right? I live in the city, but let's just say in the countryside. We would be driving around looking for a scene that reminded us of something we knew from a Corot or a Roysdale or whatever, you know, someone else's idea of what reality is. But, you know, that's okay if you're a teenager. But after you're a teenager, as you start to grow up, that's no longer acceptable, because our responsibility is to shape progressively, step by step, modestly, our own appreciation of the world in front of us. And what we discover is that we don't need Corot and we don't need Roysdale. I mean, yes, it's nice to look at their work because we can see how did they construct their thoughts. But I don't want to be looking for scenes that are reminiscent of what their scenes were, because they were their scenes, they're not mine. So what's most important to me is the access to a kind of seeing in which the moment, regardless of where we are, is characterized by a quality of magical presence. And by that, I mean that the ordinary moment, not the extraordinary moment, you know, not when the king and the queen are coming down the road in their chariot and all of the mice are playing silver trumpets along the road. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about how we approach the world as a place full of opportunity and potential, but it takes us, it takes our mind and our eyes to ignite that possibility. But it's everywhere. But what blocks me from that are preconceptions and expectations. Expectations. What did my teacher tell me? What does a dealer want? What did a collector tell me? What did I read about in the paper is good? You know, all these things that get in the way. Are you putting up another image, Ilya?
No, I'm putting up you.
Ah, okay, Ilya, can we go to the image? It's called number 6, that has the Morandi with the landscape from the city.
Yes, I'll do that. But before we proceed to the next image, can I ask a question in relationship to something you just said?
Of course.
You said that we don't really need Corot and Roysdale, but well, we don't necessarily need them to paint the same scenes they painted or to use their techniques. But don't you think that they can be great teachers of seeing?
Of course. Of course. That's why I said we do need them. I mean, I've gone through long periods of time where I simply didn't want to step into a museum, sometimes for years. Especially in the middle period of my life, I just couldn't take it anymore. I was trying to understand. I mean, of course we need them, because what we're trying to take from these people is a sense of how they wrote. You know, how they wrote their stories, but how they constructed their thought. But their thought is not our thought. And I'm reminded of that quote by Frank Auerbach in that beautiful movie that his son made, in which he's standing in the National Gallery in Trafalgar Square. He might be looking at the Constable, that very well-known painting of the ship. And the narrator asks him, what's your relationship to all these people? And he said, I think he was 80 years old or something like that when the film was made, or something. He was an old man, and he said, I need them more than ever. But his paintings don't look like theirs.
Absolutely.
And that's an important distinction for me, because how can we not be hypnotized by the power of these images to want to do that ourselves? That's why I said, okay, it's one thing when we're teenagers, you know, it's excusable. But then as we grow, it's just like, what kind of parent wants their children to be just like them? A very dangerous parent, you know.
And but let's say if we look at a range of successful adults, let's say mature, successful adults let's say, and I say that metaphorically, of course, and by that I mean a mature Frank Auerbach, a beautiful Corot, a fantastic Constable, and maybe a Japanese print, if you like those. Would you? Is there anything in common among this vast range of powerful visual statements or powerful visual experiences?
Yes, and we could extend it much further in every direction. You know, we could extend it into conceptual minimalistic sculpture. We could extend it to everything. You know, for me, there's only one question, two questions. Do I want to look at this? And how long does it hold my attention?
Mm-hmm.
You know, do I want to look at this? And how long does it hold my attention? Except at the same time, I have to remember that there are things that I'm insanely in love with now, visually, that I wouldn't have walked into the room with when I was younger.
Mm-hmm.
Because
and there are probably things that you loved when, let's say, 40 years ago, and you can't stand looking at now.
Totally. And things that have come back.
Mm-hmm.
Things that have come back. Because that's the beauty of being alive. You know, how do we, I mean, it's like what we need as nutrient in one moment is not the same as what we need in another moment. You know, we have different needs at different points. I mean, this is, you know, this is why relationships break up sometimes and why people do, you know, seemingly crazy things in their lives, because there is a necessity to be honest with oneself in terms of what is important right now. So, yeah, I mean, I was raised, you know, I was raised in a cultural atmosphere that in Israel you would call Haredi. Mm-hmm. You know, I was raised by Haredim, you know, who had very carefully constructed limitations. Mm-hmm. You know, what is art, what isn't art. I don't, you know, I don't live like that anymore, and haven't for a long time, because one of the beauties of being alive is the possibility of discovery. And discovery requires that we engage with risky behavior, right?
Yes, well, that's risk-taking and openness.
Risk-taking and openness. What parent isn't concerned with the safety of their children when they first enter the world alone? Mm-hmm. But you have to let them go, because otherwise they're not going to mature. You know, I mean, we have to, I mean, our experience is our teacher. And our experience also means that sometimes we have to take the hammer and break the idols of our fathers and mothers. You know, like we have to destroy the gods of, you know, that we were raised around, because mm-hmm. It's the only way we get from here to there.
Can you give one or two examples of art that was tremendously important to you when you were younger and you had to destroy it as an old idol?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is Poussin. Mm-hmm. You know, Poussin was a major figure for me. And then when I left school, and you know, well, we didn't look at art that was made after Courbet. That was the end of art for me when I was a student. And, you know, I discovered other things, but I went through a period, I gave my Poussin books away. I would never look at Poussin in the museums. But I can remember as a student, I had a scholarship to go to Europe for the summer. And I remember walking into the Poussin and the Claude room in the National Gallery on Trafalgar Square. And it was like, you know, falling in love for the first time. It just like, whoosh, you know, like seeing those paintings in the flesh was like a deeply multi-tiered, multi-dimensional erotic experience, in a sense. you know, I mean, those Claudes in the National Gallery and the nature of those greens. But, you know, once I started going outside to paint, when I left school and left behind my interest in becoming a figurative painter, which was my orientation as a student, I discovered the light of day in a way. And many other things were popping up and making themselves known. And slowly I completely shifted my orientation toward other kinds of art that I felt I needed at the time, and I stopped looking completely at Poussin. Then maybe 12 years ago, I revisited that idea of Cézanne's, that he wanted to do Poussin all over again from nature. And we're very lucky in Philadelphia in the museum to have two exquisitely beautiful late Cézanne paintings. They're not huge ones. They're good sized, magnificent paintings. And I would periodically go to look at these. But it took me about 10 years to be able to understand these paintings because I didn't look at Cézanne. You know, he was the enemy, right? Like, you know, like this. I didn't look at that stuff. But I was already at this point going out painting with my teacher, Seymour Reminick. And there was a small Cézanne show at the museum, and we went to the show. Now, Seymour had been very involved with Cézanne, you know, through his life. And I'd already been painting outside for about, I don't know, let's just say 8 or 10 years. And standing, you know, I love the experience of going to a gallery or museum with someone I'm very connected to and looking at work together. It's one of the most wonderful experiences. And, you know, I knew Seymour's mind quite well, and he was like a father figure to me. And his commentary, you know, like his commentary on these paintings, I was in the right place at the right time, and his words were in the right place at the right time, and boom. It's like the paintings, it's like the window shade went up. You know, suddenly I saw a little deeper into what Cézanne was up to. I mean, of course, I don't want to pretend that I understood Cézanne, because who can understand Cézanne? But I kind of got it, you know, I got it. It was like a wave that came across me. I can still remember the feeling. So sometime, you know, I mean, I continued to think about this, and years later, I was thinking about what Cézanne said about Poussin. And I thought, well, if Poussin was good enough for Cézanne, maybe I need to take another look. And I might have told you the story that there was a fabulous Poussin landscape show at the Met in New York. And I went 3 times to the show. But one of the times, I went with 2 students, 2 of my favorite students at the time, who have now gone on to become artists of some significance, and they couldn't look at these paintings. They said, we're into Antonio Lopez. Like, you know, this doesn't make any sense. Okay, you know, they were young and they couldn't see them, and I was young at one time and couldn't see stuff either. But we all go through these cycles of relationship, and really, if we don't analytically examine ourselves and really try to understand what is important for us now, with no concern for nostalgia or sentimentality, then we're not really on the best path. And I'm not on the best path for me. I'll just talk about me. I don't want to talk about me.
As a painter, I aim to, not as a painter, as a museum goer. I try to distinguish between art that is valuable and profound and serious and perhaps successful, and art that I'm drawn to, because sometimes I would be drawn to certain things for whatever personal reasons, because of whatever stage I'm going through as a painter. but there are still let's say Poussin is a painter that I admire, but I don't necessarily love him at this stage of my life. Okay,
Sure.
and there are many others like Poussin, but I would still value Poussin without necessarily being in love with his paintings at that moment. And my question, but however, I can go to a Poussin show and learn a tremendous amount of things without necessarily falling in love. And my question is, like an experienced and matured painter like yourself, let's say you've accumulated so much art historical experience.
All of which has to be forgotten also in a way.
Even better, but let's say let's say you're floating above a sea of art history, and there are some big fishes that you see from above. Some of them you want to eat, some of them you don't want to eat. Okay, and these fishes can be from anywhere. Like they can be from the Baroque period, or they can be from 2 days ago. Okay, what's in common between them?
Well, again,
I'm sorry. I think you answered this question. I now realize that I'm asking the same question again.
Well,
you said
what's in common with them
yes.
is that they stop my eye to look,
mm-hmm.
as opposed to just passing over,
mm-hmm.
And that I want to stand there and look at them for a while.
Okay. So yes, we went back in a circle. So I apologize for that. But my next question is, what is it about them that makes you stop and look?
Well, Ilya, that's a mystical, that's for like a Kabbalist to answer.
Let's give it a try.
That's a mystical, but look, can we go back to the cake?
Sure.
Can we go back to the slide of the cake? Because I would like to say that what makes me stop and look at a work of art is the same thing that makes me stop and look at a piece of cake. And I don't mean that in a flip way, that the clues are all around us. They're in front of us everywhere. The question is, do we see them? That the world is calling to us from every direction to take notice. But, we're in our heads in a variety of ways, and often we don't notice. So this piece of cake, it's not just a piece of cake, it's a form. And the form has been determined by the viewfinder.
Mm-hmm.
We're a viewfinder, right? Like there are many kinds of viewfinders. The camera is a viewfinder, we are a viewfinder, but the camera, what the beauty of the camera is that it has 4 edges.
Mm-hmm.
Be it a rectangle or a square. Paintings and photographs also have edges. Sculptures usually don't have edges. That's something else, but when I look through something, when I'm holding up my phone to look at one of these cakes, I'm moving the phone around. It's not just point and shoot. I'm moving the phone around because I'm tasting what it is that I'm seeing. I don't mean literally I'm tasting the cake. I'm tasting the arrangement of darks and lights. Mm-hmm. Because I'm not using words. I'm not interested in, like when I'm looking at this, I'm not thinking, oh my God, I really want to eat this up. I bet it's so good. I'm just looking at the shapes. Where are the lights and where are the darks? What size and shape are they? These are the questions, just like when I go into churches and I see nuns kneeling in front of the Stations of the Cross with their rosary beads. They're doing a meditation. My meditation, intuitively, my intuitive analytical mind is asking myself, what am I tasting here? And I'm not just doing quick point and shoot. Even if I'm taking a very rapid photograph, I'm moving the camera around so that I'm feeling the choreographic relationship between the darks and the lights. Remember, this photograph of the cake, there's a world on either side of the edges that could have been included, but I zoomed in a certain way, I framed it in a certain way. What determined those choices has to do with everything. Everything that has happened to me up until that time. All the paintings I've seen, all the drawings I've looked at, all the meals I've had with friends, you know, everything informs how we see and where, you know, and where we put the viewfinder. And to some degree, it's the same as when we're looking at something, but painting and looking at painting and looking at photograph, looking at other images has, of course, laid nutrients and fertilizer into the soil, you know, but hopefully when I'm doing the looking, I'm not thinking, I want to do it like this one did it, or I want to do it like that one did it. I'm trying to bring as much, look, we can never be ourselves completely. We all have a mother and father, and we have grandparents and great-grandparents, and we are the inheritors of a long line. I mean, even if we don't know, even if we didn't know our grandparents, or even if we didn't know our great-grandparents or our great-great-grandparents, we know them in a way because our parents were the inheritors of their parents and their parents' parents. So in some way, and I'm saying this, of course, metaphorically, we are inheriting a huge kind of parade of visual thought that funnels down to the moment for us. And when you're in the moment, you know, when you have to go out on the stage to do a dance, there's not a lot of time to think about certain things. You're in the moment. You're in a choreographic moment. And I feel like that's what we're after in the way we make contact with the visual world. And the other thing oh, did you want to ask a question?
Yes, let me stop you for a second. I think you looked at the cake with a viewfinder, but when we go to a museum, we normally don't look at art we love through a viewfinder. We look at the painting or the sculpture as is. So in a way, being in the museum is a more passive looking, as opposed to walking through nature with a camera or a viewfinder. So as when we are passively walking through a museum, we're still active in making selections. And you said, okay, certain things stop you and make you look at them, and then they make you look at them again. And so I'm trying to distill what is it that makes you stop. And there's one little statement that you made about the experience of photographing the cake. You said it's an arrangement of shapes. Is it the same thing in painting?
I think it's only that.
Okay.
It's only that, because for me, the only thing that matters in painting is its abstraction. And of course, abstraction does not mean Jackson Pollock. I mean, Jackson Pollock was an abstract expressionist painter, but that's not abstraction. You know, the only thing, Ilya, can you put up the Fra Angelico of the person who's in the bed with everyone else standing around? I mean, what stops us at any moment is not the name of a thing, but the appearance of the thing. And you know, as far as I can tell, that's about what is it? You know, what are its shapes? What are its colors? What are the lights and darks doing? And how does it all fit together to speak, you know, to have a voice? And maybe this painting is, so, you know, I have no idea what this is. I wasn't raised in this tradition. You know, I was raised listening to stories about the Akedah, you know, and all that stuff. You know, I don't know anything about this. I'm not plugged into the emotional meaning in this system of religious symbols. I have no idea who these people are. I have no idea what's going on, but I can't take my eyes off this painting. It's a miraculous painting in a way. I've looked at it many, many times, and I can't get enough of it. And, you know, all we have to do is get a little bit analytical about what's going on here and ask some simple questions like, where are the lights and where are the darks? Let's just look at the lights and the darks and what they're doing. For me, that's how I enter the painting. I'm not entering the painting by way of its symbology or anything. And I have a feeling that, that if someone went up to a church in Siena or in Florence in the 14th century, where a lot of these kinds of paintings lived, to light a candle for their grandson who got kicked in the eye by a donkey, and he was laying at home with pus coming out of his eye, probably getting infected, and the grandma went up to a church to light a candle. Which painting did she stop in front of? Of course, there are many opinions about this, but my feeling is that painters were involved with construction of form. Because many painters were telling the same stories. The basements of the museums in Italy are full of paintings that are never going to see the light of day, because they're not very interesting paintings for the most part. There are other things that are much more interesting. What makes it interesting? Not the story, because the story was told 1,000 times. Many people did the flagellation of Christ, but Piero did it in a very particular way. Whatever this scene is, I'm sure many people have painted it, but it's not the story. The story is the narrative of form. So when I'm looking at these kinds of paintings, I have no idea what's going on other than the story that it's telling about its structure. Its structure. You know, this is divided. It's a slightly off square rectangle divided into two distinct parts. Each part has its own characteristics. Just look what the lights and look what the darks are doing. And the relationship abstractly between the lights and the darks. Then the colors. Look at the blues, what the blues are doing. Let's look at the figure on the left, that woman who has a halo, and she's holding a coat, offering it to the old man in bed. Let's look at the blue that is her robe. On the right side, you have that robe coming down in a very specific shape. There are other blue shapes in this painting, but none others quite like that. Now, let's look at the part of her robe that's in shadow over her shoulder that's on the left. What a fantastic shape. It's also blue, but it's a dark blue. It has a very distinct presence within the context of this photograph, of this painting, of this photograph of this painting. Mm-hmm. Similarly, the elongated rectangle on the right, the guy who's kneeling. Look at the shape of the robe, the shape of the black robe. It's so beautiful. And when we say, look at the shape, we also have to remember the context, right? Because nothing is really understood outside its context. We don't just look at a shape. And it's the same when we go out on the street. When we're in the street, we are not just looking at objects. Everything is about relationships. The visual world is relational. So one thing that I used to experience when I was an outdoor painter is I'd be painting and I'd be looking at a tree and I'd be like, oh, I gotta get this tree right. You know, it's not working. And then I would have to dump a bucket of cold water in my head and say, idiot, just take a step back. And remember, the painting is not about the tree. It's about the relationship of all the parts together. So when I look at the black shape over to the right, that robe, there's no other shape like that in the painting, but what I'm relating the shape to is not only to the other darks, but also to the entire painting. So when we look at a painting, or when we look at a photograph, or when we look at nature, one of the most important questions we can ask ourselves is, how does this relate to that? In order to understand anything that's going on, we can't just look at one part. We have to look at it relationally. So that when I look at that black robe as a shape presence, I'm also asking myself, how does it relate to that whole vertical segment that it's in? And then how does it relate to the overall painting? I've said before, one of the most important parts of a painting or a photograph are the edges, because the edges are what encloses everything, and the edges are what holds everything together. And when a painter starts with a blank surface to make a drawing or a painting, the very first moves are as important, if not more so, than the very final moves, because the early moves are the setup. And the setup means...
Sorry, the first moves are?
The beginning of the setup.
The setup, yes.
The beginning of the setup. They're not the punchline. You know, comedians do that thing with the setup and the punchline. You know, the setup is not the punchline. The setup is what is like, what is this, how are we building the story? So when I look at that black shape, I'm not just looking at it and saying, oh man, he really knows how to draw shapes. Ilya, I can remember one of the summers that I was with the school in Italy. I remember a particular student I was friendly with coming out of the museum for the Duomo in Siena, because we were living outside of Siena, and we'd go out, and I ran into a bunch of students, and I remember this student saying about the Duccio Maesta altarpiece, which is one of the most insane kind of abstract presentations in terms of what Duccio is doing with the musicality of those shape relationships. And I remember this student said to me, man, he can really do portraits, can he? He can really paint faces. And I remember feeling so sorry for this guy, because it's like, that's the takeaway from looking at these paintings, that he could really do faces. Like, who cares about the face? You know, it's not a face that makes a painting. It's not the face in a Van Dyck that makes the painting, you know, Van Dyck from history. It's not the face that makes the painting great. It's the disposition and the gesture and the organization of everything. So when I look at that black shape, I don't care what it is. I don't even want to think of it as a robe. I'm looking at it as a shape that sits in a context. And that context is the rectangular enclosure that is the entire painting, the playing field, the basketball court, right? There are many things going on in a basketball court. That's why they video the games from above, so the coach can then sit with the players and analytically examine what happened during the game in terms of the overall configuration. We're concerned with overall configuration. So not only am I asking myself analytical taste questions about what is the relationship of the darks to each other, but how do they sit within that playing field? Where are each one of the darks? The two darks on the right are right in front of, behind each other. The other one is all the way over there. There is a kind of a power between these things. You know, there's like a magnetic field. There's a force field here between the shapes. And look at the lights. Look at that fellow with the black robe on the right. Then look at the light shape that's just below his hands. And look at the elongated triangle at the bottom of his robe. This painter is an exquisite cook. This is the kind of cook where you sit down to a meal and you taste and you go, mmm. And then you're rolling it around in your mouth and you're thinking to yourself, oh my God, how did they do this? You know what I mean? Like the aftertaste and the linger. I mean, this to me is what good painting is about. And for me, it doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter if it's a conceptual minimalist from the 1960s or if it's someone from antiquity. They're all dealing with the same questions. And the questions are basically those of how we arrange form.
So I have a follow-up question. There are some amazing cooks in art history that have taught many other so-so cooks how to make a meal. For some reason, that never works. So let's say everyone who has done pastiches of Claude Lorrain, the French painter from the 17th century. I mean, the followers of Claude aren't as exciting as Claude himself. Or let's say the many followers of Caravaggio. They've done some horrendous paintings. So as we speak about fantastic cooking, why is it that in art recipes usually don't work?
Oh, Ilya, this is this is a seminar question. I mean, that's a whole seminar. Recipe, we all have. I mean, my mother, Oliver Shulam, my mother was a wonderful cook, but she wasn't my grandmother. She had my grandmother's recipes, but she couldn't cook like my grandmother. She cooked like herself, and she probably became a better cook when she thought to herself, you know what? I'm not my mother. I'm just like going to cook by myself. And in a way, when I was a younger painter, I was terrified by the idea of leaving the recipes. Mm-hmm. Because I thought that I needed the recipe. But there comes a time when you either do or don't realize what the game is. And, again, the recipes may work when you're 15 because you're just finding your way. And when I say 15, I also mean metaphorically.
Of course.
But something that we are all very close to because of painters we know and places we've been involved with. Corot went to Italy and made extraordinary paintings that were never seen in his lifetime by...
Well, except for his friends who visited him.
Except for his friends, because he was working with a taste that was totally unacceptable in a mainstream way. But when we go to Italy and try to make paintings like Corot's, and of course, like he's huge. It's like having an overpowering father, and we almost have to resort to violence, or an overpowering mother, mm-hmm. And we almost have to resort to emotional violence to set ourselves free. And we often have to do many stupid things, behaviorally, emotionally, in order, and also get a very good therapist, to set ourselves free from the power that these forces exercise over us, because the only job of our education is to bring out our own voice. And that's very difficult to do with an overbearing father and an overbearing mother. Often the kid has to run away, and turn their back on the recipes.
Mm-hmm. But the personal voice, does it have anything to do with art, or it's more of a human issue?
The formation of a personal voice?
Yes, in other words, like you spoke of great art as great composers of form, right? Like you look at paintings as arrangements of form, and well, it's kind of easy to figure out recipes where you put the lights, where you put the darks, and here you go. But that doesn't work for some reason.
It never works.
So and then you tell, okay, and then we ask ourselves, okay, we've learned a number of things. What do we do with this knowledge now? We learned how to arrange form in certain ways. How do we do it in an interesting way, in a way that is more personal? Now, this personal thing, is that something related to our experience of art, or is it related to our human experience?
You've answered the question. It's both.
Both.
I mean, because there's no separation, Ilya. You know, they are one and the same thing. That our art experience is one thing, and our human experience is another thing, but they're totally connected, because how do we look at art if not through the lens of our human experience, right? Like, the way we look at art is determined by our human experience. Because what else? I mean, how else can we see art? We can't separate the two things.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you don't mind, I'll tell a very brief personal story about my development as a painter. I came to a point when I got really tired of what I was doing, and I thought, okay, it's time to reinvent myself. And I made a number of paintings in which I chose a very personal subject matter. And I know we're not dealing with words, but it was a subject matter. I mean, the painting could almost be read as an illustration of some story. And I said to myself, well, I don't care if it's going to be a good painting or not. It may be a total flop. I'm not trying to make it beautiful. And I think at that moment, the most original things came out. And by original, I mean original formally. So I felt that finally I'm finding a form that is more or less unpredictable, as opposed to being a pastiche of, let's say, Corot.
Yes, and you were lucky perhaps to recognize that something was going on, because my experience has been that often when those kinds of things are happening, I discount them. I dismiss them as transgressive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not so much now, but in the past. Like, I'm thinking about one of the summers that I was painting on the Irish coast years ago. It was a very difficult summer. It was raining the whole time, and I had to recalibrate my expectations, because I wasn't coming back to this landscape and to this setting that I had known, because it was raining all the time. And I, at the end of the first week, I threw everything away in total frustration.
Mm-hmm.
I was ready to like tear my hair out, and I had more hair at the time. And that summer, that summer went on to be a glorious one. It was one of the great, I mean, it's a terrible word, but breakthrough. You know, it was a time when the world revealed itself to me, like the world put its arms around me in a new way. And I kind of went crazy for the visual meanings of rain and what rain offers in an outdoor setting in the countryside. And I came to understand that air is color space, and that they're not a bunch of objects. Oh, there's a nice little cottage over there and there's a cow. But that summer I came to understand the sort of erotic choreography between all the elements that make everything what it is. And that everything was one, you know, that everything was together. And it was a tremendous summer that was then the beginning of many more summers, but I threw the first week away because of those two birds sitting on my shoulder, two parrots. Each of my teachers or whatever, the art world, like I was judging myself. And look, I don't want to fool myself. I try not to go to those extremes anymore, but it's a very fine edge because we have to be self-critical. Like I have to stand back with my conceptual cigarette, like from my work and say, because that's how every judgment is made along the way anyway. When something is being put together with something else, we're always standing back with the conceptual cigarette making judgments, but there has to be a limit to the judgment because it can't be the guillotine. We can't, when we censor ourselves, we're also defacing ourselves.
We're also ourselves.
When we are censoring ourselves,
yes,
we are also defacing ourselves in a way that, it's just like, why do some people wake up in the morning and say, oh my God, I really hate my nose. I have to get a new nose. I had a very good friend in high school. He's dead now, unfortunately. His name was Fred. Fred had a big nose, and he was a little guy with a big nose, which made it even worse. He was a short guy and he had a big nose. I loved Fred's nose. It was beautiful. It was a real ethnic nose. And he was terribly embarrassed by this nose. And he was in a motorcycle crash in 11th or 12th grade and smashed up his face. And one of the things the doctor offered was to redo his nose. I couldn't really look at his face seriously after that because he had lost what was most characteristically his in the most beautiful way. And, to extend the metaphor to our own work, I know it's very difficult because we're human animals and we live in social contexts with other people, and we have people whose opinions we take seriously, and we are impacted by oh, my friend is selling a lot of work. It looks like that. Maybe I should be doing. All the things that run through people's minds, most of which are horribly destructive. It can be very difficult to allow ourselves to be ourselves.
Stuart, we've been talking to some time, and I don't want our audience to get too tired. So let's start wrapping up. If you don't mind, I would like to run a very brief experiment.
Yes.
I will flash a few images at you, and I would like you, if you don't mind, of course, to respond. Like if you were in a museum looking at these pieces, would you walk away? Would you stop? Would you come back? And if yes, why?
Okay, let's play this game.
Okay, so let me bring up these images. It will take a second.
This is a conceptual one we're looking at now.
No, right now I'm seeing you. Okay. See, you see a gray screen, right?
I see your what looks like.
You're seeing a gray screen?
I'm seeing a gray screen, Ilya.
Perfect. Okay, so let's go to image number 1, the first work of art in the virtual museum, looking at it with Stuart Shils.
Okay. Well, this is a kind of painting I would have liked in my first year at school. I don't know, Ilya. I mean, of course, we're doing a disservice to the painting because we're not looking at the actual thing. And as Walter Benjamin reminded us, an actual object has an aura. And, when I look at a reproduction, it doesn't have the same aura. But from looking at this in the reproduction, I would say I'm going to keep moving.
Mm-hmm. Can you say why?
Well, I think it's related to when I was in sixth grade, and we had dance class after school
Mm-hmm.
in the gymnasium with chaperones, and all the girls would be sitting on one side of the room and the boys were sitting on the other side of the room. And the teacher would say, come on, kids, you have to go over and choose someone from the other side of the room to dance with. I mean, remember, this was before, boys dance with boys and girls, there was a binary expectation.
Mm-hmm.
This was a long time ago. Why did I go over to the other side of the room and ask someone to dance? Probably for the same reason that I would want to or not want to look at this painting. Just I'm not attracted to it.
Well, but you're an experienced painter, and you've seen a lot of visual arrangements in your life, in museums, in galleries. What is it about this arrangement that makes it insufficiently attractive to you?
Well, probably the same as when I was 12 and 13 years old and I started listening to the radio
Mm-hmm.
and listening to rock and roll. There were certain songs that from the very beginning, the songwriter was understood that there was a hook. There was a way of grabbing my attention. Just like, everyone knows this. I'm thinking of Beethoven's art songs. He has a song called Adelaide. Da, 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 da. Oh no, maybe that's Ideale. It's like an art song I'm thinking of. Da, 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 da. It's no different than when I was 12 or 13 years old and heard da, 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 da. The composer hooked me in both cases. Mm-hmm. Just like I've listened to the Miles Davis albums, Kind of Blue and Sketches of Spain 1,000 times. And every time I hear the opening bar of each one of those pieces of music, I am thrown hypnotically into a grip. I like the Ottoman. The orange Ottoman is wonderful, but also, I have a difficult time with aristocratic painting, and with painting that, look, Ang's late portraits of women, I love those paintings, but the one that we have in the National Gallery here in Washington with the purple and the gray charcoal, but this just isn't, it's not turning me on.
Okay, next one.
Oh no, this is a bullshit painting. This is what friends of my grandmother's used to call dreck. This is dreck. This is atelier bullshit. I'm sorry, Ilya.
Well, I didn't promise that I will show you.
No, I know. This is an example of a misunderstanding of a misunderstanding.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, good technique, but this is the kind of painting that Hitler liked. Mm-hmm. And that Mussolini liked. This is dreck.
Well, I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm wondering if you can put your finger in it. Why?
Well, in the first pass, it just strikes me as high kitsch.
Mm-hmm.
High kitsch, meaning that yes, this is very, whoever painted this was very serious. But so was Mao Zedong when he killed 20 million people in China. I don't know, this is you see, you have to also remember that when I was younger, I would have been attracted to this kind of painting as a demonstration of good technique. Mm-hmm. You can go to New York and study with Jacob Collins and learn how to do this.
Okay, next image.
Well, this is this is one of two people. I don't remember which one, but this is serious work. This is from Japan, right?
Of course.
Yeah. I love this period of, is it a woodcut or a watercolor?
It's a woodcut. I think it's Utamayo,
Yeah.
late 18th century.
Yeah, we're looking into the mind of genius here. Mm-hmm. I mean, those questions we ask, and the analytical questions we ask to dig into something. I mean, first of all, my intuitive response is so much different than the painting that preceded this. Like immediately, I'm in a room where I can breathe.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
There's no trace of kitsch in this image, and the shaping of the delivery of the song, what the darks are doing. Look, the darks are over on the left side of the painting, and it's not. And look at how there is that dark that looks like it's under a pot, all the way over on the left. You see that very small dark.
I didn't notice it before you mentioned it. Yeah, but I see it.
But so here we are. So this is, I mean, this is an example, just like with the Hackney we were looking at, where I said I've looked at that painting hundreds of times, and I'd never noticed the space between the tree trunk and the shadow before. Mm-hmm. But I've been looking at a lot of things lately with something very much happening along the edge. And look at that black vertical that's running almost immediately through the center of the painting, not quite at the top. There's that is also part of the conversation. You know, what we call the background here is not at all background, it's integral. Mm-hmm. That this artist has intentionally left the space back there quiet, but the space back there is not empty. Mm-hmm. It's very full, because when you leave things out, that doesn't mean you're making the image impoverished. You know, what we leave out is as important as what we put in. And one thing that strikes me here as so beautifully eloquent is the relationship of the faces to all that space behind the figures that is just the paper. They're both lights, but they have such different voices, right? The shapes that are behind the women, those light shapes, have a completely different voice than the shapes of the faces themselves, than the shapes of the feet. I could look at this for hours.
Mm-hmm. Can you, I don't want to subject you to looking at this stuff too much, because I can't say that I love this piece at all. But can you say whether there's anything that is objectively better about this than that, in a, like, as a service to our audience?
Yes. As a service.
It's not a matter of taste. I'm trying to move beyond taste and find something objectively appealing.
So in America, when we put on the television and the president comes on, we're looking into the mind of a fucking idiot. Okay? It's the same with that other painter. We're looking into an immature, kind of crippled intelligence, mm-hmm. compared to the Japanese print. There's no comparison. I mean, we're looking at a deficient, crippled intelligence here that has, for any number of reasons, swallowed the wrong hook along the way. He or she probably had terrible teachers. You know, this is also the kind of stuff that comes out of ateliers with roots in Russian realism, mm-hmm. you know, of a very kitschy sort. But this is the kind of art that the fascist dictators in the mid-20th century collected.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So,
I mean, that would be the kind of painting that I would expect to see in a syphilitic brain dictator in South America. That would be in a movie, right? That would be the kind of art he collected. This Japanese print, we're looking at profoundly beautiful poetry. You know, we're looking into I mean, when you're looking at someone's work, you're looking at more than just the flatness of the work itself. You're looking into a whole encyclopedia of informed decision-making. You're looking at inheritances of all kinds from the past. I mean, we could talk about this, you know, on and on. Let's look at some more images.
Well, we can skip this one, of course.
Magnificent design.
Yeah, these amazing erotic reds.
Just magnificent design. You know, this would be like in a movie where, you know, a couple is out to dinner and the waiter brings over, you know, they're having appetizer and the waiter brings over an incredible Chateauneuf de Pape and, you know, uncorks it and pours it into the glass and they inhale the bouquet. And it would be, you know, it would be something like this, like just magnificent design, you know, like deep erudition. Next one. Is it Russian Byzantine or?
It's Russian. I would assume it's 16th century, but I'm not sure.
16th century. Yeah. You know, I mean, I know the context of this work, but if I had my choice, I would rather look at the stuff like this that came out of the 12th century. You know, because there's better stuff than this. I mean, what I like, I really
next one.
Is this a Cimabue?
No.
Is this also Russian from like years later?
It's an image that you probably have not seen. It's Russian, 15th century.
15th century, yeah. I mean, I understand that we all get to our own questions when we get to them. It's nice. It's nice. You know, the hair and the blue in the hair is of particular interest to me. You know, maybe there is a kind of a dynamic presence in the shape of the hair with the light around it and the shape of that blue. That's where my eye goes. You know, that's where my eye goes first. But the rest of the painting is leaving me a little bored. You know, when I move down to the body and the wings, you know, there's better stuff. You know, in terms of, I know this kind of work. I know this kind of work that, you know, that developed in Italy. You know, Cimabue and Simon Martini. But you know, this is a little boring for me.
Okay, fair enough.
Hello, Ilya. It's Stuart. I'm sending this as a follow-up on our conversation with the hope that perhaps you can send it to those folks who participated in the conversation on Saturday evening, because I wanted to just, in a follow-up way, clarify something that I said toward the end when you were showing me those images of other people's paintings. I felt like I didn't have my dancing shoes tied tightly enough. And I wanted to just clarify something. The first image you showed, which was a portrait of a French aristocrat or a king, I don't know who it was. I used to know about those paintings, but I'm 65 years old, almost 66 in a week, and I only have so much room in my hard drive right now in the foreground, and that's reserved for what is most immediately important to me, and I've let a lot of things go that I used to have very nimbly accessible at my fingertips by necessity. And I wanted to say something about that painting because you asked me about my response to it. And I think I said that this was a painting I really was not attracted to wanting to look at. And I wanted to explain a little bit more what I meant about that. When I look at a painting, what I'm looking for in the first flourish of impact is a sense of its presence as an abstraction. And by what I mean by an abstraction is not abstract expressionist painting, as I've explained before, but as a unity of form in which in a single impactful flourish, like an arrow piercing an apple on the head of William Tell's son's head, on the, when William Tell's son put the apple on his head, Guillaume Tell, the son, the story, when the arrow split the apple, that's the equivalent metaphorically or by way of analogy of what I'm looking for when I first meet a painting. I want the first kiss to really do me in the best sense, do me in. Now, sometimes it requires time, right? We can't always see everything that will have an eventual impact on us immediately because we come to everything with a set of expectations, with a background, with a history, and some things we need to wait until it's time. But generally speaking, as I'm scanning the world around me, I'm registering intuitively a reading of impacts. And what I want from a painting, in most cases, is an immediate impact of some sort that inspires me to want to stay and have a conversation, as opposed to next. So what that means is that the meaning of the painting is not rooted in anything related to sociology, to nothing related to history, to nothing related to art history, to nothing related to politics, to nothing related to class. That what I'm looking for is the same thing that Beethoven laid on us, so to speak, when he began his tune, da 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 da. It's a flourish of form that captivates us from the first note and holds us and carries us into a depth of connection that continues to open up. When I looked at that painting, I didn't feel that at all. Now, when I was a student, I was in a very different place than I am now. And I might have looked at a painting I got and said, damn, that guy can really paint draperies. Mamma mia. Or, something like that. Man, he can really render surface. That's superficial stuff. That's not even peshat. That's like schwach, in a way. It doesn't impress me anymore. I'm an old man. I need more than that to become aroused because I'm kind of jaded. I want a big hit. Now, a big hit, I get an enormous hit when I look at a Kurt Schwitter's collage, 1913 or whatever, 1919. I get a big hit when I look at a Milton Avery. I get a big hit when I look at an Agnes Martin. I get a big hit when I look at a very good Agnes Neil. Alice Neil. I want an immediate, impactful experience that I know is going to make it worth my while to linger a bit longer, other than a demonstration of expertise. Expertise is not so interesting to me. I'm much more interested in something that we might call beginner's mind. Expertise is easy. You know, I could go and study in the St. Petersburg Academy. You know, there's a wonderful quote by Robert Henry, who of course is not the greatest painter in the world, but he was a deeply inspiring and extremely important teacher in America. Turned a lot of people on. And he gave a speech in Philadelphia at what is now the Moore College of Art for Women, but had a different name then. And it's in his book that's called The Art Spirit. And that book of things that were put together, I believe, posthumously by his students. I believe, I may be wrong on that. And he's talking to the audience and saying, you know, I went back last year to Académie Julienne, where I had been a student 13 years ago, and I saw some of my old friends who are still there. And they're doing drawings that are more correct than those of Titian. Now, what he means by that is, you know, like another long conversation, which we can't have right here. And then he said something like, they will never be painters. And I know exactly what he's talking about. Expertise does not manifest itself in precision, or in exactitude, rather. Precision is something else. Perceptual precision has a lot more to do with things than exactitude. And when I looked at that painting, I see exactitude. I don't feel any sense of humanity. When Kurt Schwitters puts together 5 crummy pieces of paper to make a collage, he brings us to our knees, if we're open to that. You know, when I was a student, I would have looked at Kurt Schwitters and said, this is a bunch of bullshit. Like, don't give me this. But I'm not in that place anymore in my head. You know, there was no humanity in that painting. There was just pretension and a lot of showing off. You know, like, I'm tired of showing off. You know, we don't need it. We don't need it so much. You know, the world is filled with show-offs. I'm looking for something else. I'm looking for a certain kind of rugged honesty that manifests itself by way of a very highly individualized personality. And, you know, that kind of a painting that we were looking at, it relates to another time and another place. As does, you know, let's look at someone like mature Titian or Veronese or Giorgione or whomever. You know, let's think of any of the Italians whose work makes us insane. There's something missing in a painting like we were looking at, and we could make a long list of what was missing. What was missing is the core of what is important in art, and that is a sort of a simplified, accessible pathway to a depth of feeling other than having the accoutrements of aristocracy thrown at me as the viewer. In other words, also, what is the painting adding up to instead of just an inventory list of facts? There's a drapery, there's a robe, there's an ottoman to put the feet on. You know, like, what is it other than a collection of facts? How does it connect to the psyche, to the heart, to whatever? I couldn't feel anything. And I doubt that anyone could feel anything from that painting at the time that it was made, other than the intimidating wind of aristocratic strength. You know, it's the kind of painting that was concocted in European countries to flatter the aristocracy. Let's compare that painting with one of Chardin's self-portraits in pastel. Okay, like talk about like a paired comparison. There's no comparison in the world. You know, Chardin's self-portrait pastels, he's a Hamish guy. You know, you can see it all over the work. He's not trying to impress anyone. He's tearing his heart open for us. The same with his mature still lifes. He's not trying to impress anyone. He's like giving it to us big time in a very deep way, related to qualities of abstraction. And again, by abstraction, I don't mean throwing paint around. I mean, in the same sense that Beethoven, on the one hand, he could do da 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 da. On the other hand, he could do dun 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 dun. Oh my God! When you hear that, dun 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 dun, don't you want to like just turn to the person sitting next to you and give them a kiss, you know, so to speak, metaphorically? The music just opens the heart and opens the mind, and the kishkas also. And that kind of painting we were looking at of that, I'm assuming French aristocrat, was flat for me because it felt like surface, and I couldn't get myself beyond the surface. And if I was going to sit and make a line drawing to try and dissect or understand what is it about this painting that's happening, I would just have a bunch of shapes that are not adding up to something essential or something powerful. So anyway, that's just like a little bit of, I mean, I could go on for an hour, but I'm not going to because, you know, we have things to do. But I just wanted to send this. If you could send this out to folks who tuned in, that would be great as a follow-up to looking at that painting. And I'll see you. Thanks. Bye.